We're back. We disappeared and now we're starting over. So as I was saying before, the plan is each week we'll have a different devotee speaking of their memories of Srila Prabhupada, of their experience of Srila Prabhupada. And if a devotee can share more than an hour, we'll invite that devotee to either come back the next week or to come back at another time. So that's the plan. We want to welcome you. Who is here tonight, Uddhava? We have Black Ops. Whoa, we've never seen Black Ops and Cynical. 2 new guests, Manjesh, Bhakti and Carol is here. Welcome everyone. And if you are watching now, if you are on Krishna.com and you see me, all you have to do is hit chat below my picture. You can join us if you'd like to ask questions or take part in any of the discussions we're having. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to be the first devotee to begin speaking about Srila Prabhupada. But before I speak about Srila Prabhupada, I just wanted to let you know that in a certain sense it's impossible for you to understand what it was like to be in Srila Prabhupada's presence, because I can't say it was like being in the presence of this person or being in the presence of that person, because Prabhupada was different from anyone, at least anyone that I ever met, anyone that I ever had the honor to associate with. It was just totally different. And what we mean by different, a transcendental personality like none other that we have ever met, and therefore the experience is unique, and I can't compare it to anyone or anything. So having said that, that puts us in a little bit of a disadvantage. Often devotees ask me, well, what was it like to be with Srila Prabhupada? And I can only express it through words, but the actual experience is difficult, if not impossible, to describe. Still, we will try to describe it as best we can, because whatever we can gather, whatever we can learn about Srila Prabhupada, certainly we should learn. So before I start, I also wanted to mention that often devotees who've never met Srila Prabhupada will say that, I wish I could have met him, you're so fortunate to have met him. And that is all true, but there were many people that did meet Srila Prabhupada, even people who were initiated by him, who didn't take advantage of him, who didn't really understand him, who even doubted him, who took initiation and later doubted him and even offended him. So just having his association in and of itself is not sufficient, because ultimately the individual has to take advantage of that association. And Shastra says you can't understand a pure devotee unless you yourself become pure. So many people misunderstood Srila Prabhupada. And so it's not in and of itself a guarantee of anything necessarily if you have Srila Prabhupada's association. But if you serve Srila Prabhupada, if you surrendered to Srila Prabhupada, if you helped in his mission, then by his mercy you could understand something of his very deep personality. Now, another thing that I would like to share from my own experience is that Srila Prabhupada was not someone you could easily figure out. Certain things about him, yes, you could understand. They were things which you could say were, how should we say, you understood that he would react in a certain way in certain situations. But in other, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word when someone, you know how they're going to act? What's the word, Vidyanan? Not dependable, but
predictable.
Predictable, that's the word. So in certain ways Prabhupada was predictable, but in other ways very unpredictable. And often in certain situations I would begin to think that Srila Prabhupada is going to say something, or he's going to act in a certain way, or he's going to react in a certain way. And many times I was wrong, because I saw him act that way at one time, but now in the same situation he was acting in a different way. So we couldn't always understand how Srila Prabhupada would react. And sometimes I think, at least for myself, I would try to figure him out, not in a negative way, but in a way that I could understand how I should act. So I would think, okay, here's a situation, Prabhupada is going to react and act in this way. Not always true. And oftentimes he reacted in ways which were unexpected for us. Another aspect of Srila Prabhupada that I noticed is that he never made anyone feel that their service was not valuable. He never made anybody feel that they were not valuable. He never made anybody feel that they were not enough, not good enough. He never made anybody feel so guilty that they couldn't come back to Krishna consciousness. In a sense, I would say he really never made people feel guilty. He was one. Let me explain this. You know, sometimes if someone doesn't live up to what you expect, you might denigrate them. You might say something negative to them because you expected more of them. Except for a few of Srila Prabhupada's leaders, he didn't deal with people that way. Rather, the way he dealt with his disciples is through appreciation. That whatever service they did, he appreciated, and he saw them as helping him spread his mission and helping him serve Srila Prabhupada. So he was very grateful for that. And that was the general tone and mood in which he dealt with his disciples. Very grateful, very thankful, very appreciative. And never did you get this from Prabhupada, well, what you did wasn't good enough. What you did get was, you can do more. Definitely got that. And then he would encourage us to do more. Always. Definitely encourage us to do more. He would always push us to do more. He would push us to have faith in Krishna, that we could do more by his grace. But at the same time, if you reported to Srila Prabhupada, this is what you did, you would never get a letter back or a response back in which he would say, that wasn't good enough. I'm very dissatisfied with you, you could have done better. Now, there are certain situations where devotees made mistakes, big mistakes, and then Prabhupada would say that because he would have to correct them. It was something that was very wrong, either in a practical way, which caused a very negative reaction or a problem, or something that was philosophically off. So I'm speaking in general, in terms of my service, your service, and other devotees' service. When they reported that to Prabhupada, or when Prabhupada heard about their service, he was always very encouraging. He would always say, I'm very pleased with your service, thank you very much, like that. So that was a wonderful quality. Another aspect of Srila Prabhupada was he was always giving us service, giving us responsibility, not micromanaging us. In the way Srila Prabhupada spread the movement is he spread it through his disciples. And he wasn't on top of every disciple and what they were doing, but he gave them leeway to use their creativity, to use their intelligence. And that requires detachment, because at that time, when Srila Prabhupada was spreading Krishna consciousness in America, he was around 50 years older than all of his disciples. Prabhupada is 54 years older than I am. So he's dealing with a disciple. That time I was 20 years old, 19 and 20, and I was in charge of a temple. So he allowed me to be in charge of a temple, and he was not telling me what to do. So now I am a 19-year-old. My experience of the world is very limited. Really no real-world practical experience, because I became a devotee from college. And when you go to college is a different world. You're not out there in the real world doing things generally. You're not doing a lot. So here I am now in the real world having to manage a center, and here is Srila Prabhupada, who's had a full life of business, grihastha life, raising children, who's had 70 years of experience, and there's me with no experience. And still, he was not saying, do this, don't do that, do this, do it this way, do it that way. He really allowed us to use our own initiative, our own creativity, our own enthusiasm to do things in Krishna's service. So that requires tremendous amount of detachment. And so that's how Prabhupada worked with us. And another aspect of something that you can understand very clearly if you read Prabhupada's letters, but I will explain it from my point of view, having lived through it, that when you joined the Krishna consciousness movement, one of the things that was given to you very clearly was that this is a movement that is meant to spread all around the world, and it's moving, and you're always being encouraged to spread it. So it was very clear after you joined the movement, even after a few days, what to speak of a few weeks or a few months, that your mission or your goal was to dedicate yourself to spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. And so we got a lot of encouragement from Srila Prabhupada about spreading Krishna consciousness. This is really what he wanted to do. This is he felt all of us as disciples were his assistants in spreading the mission of his spiritual master. So there was this very strong missionary spirit. It wasn't that when people joined Krishna consciousness that they felt it was really just for them, but they really got it that we're a movement, we're spreading. That's what we're doing here. And that is how the movement spread, because Prabhupada was always pushing us. Spread it, be compassionate, be kind. Oftentimes he said, if you love your countrymen, then give them Krishna consciousness. It's the only thing that's going to help them. So the missionary spirit was very, very strong. And part of that missionary spirit, which Prabhupada gave us, was take inconvenience. Not only take it, but you have to. And also there'll be many challenges and there'll be many difficulties that you'll have to face. But we accept them as how should we say? We accept them as not just as a challenge, but we accept them as an honor to undergo difficulty in Krishna's service. So that is how Prabhupada trained us. That is how he encouraged us, that it's a great benediction to accept difficulties in spreading Krishna consciousness. And then he would so often say that if you do this, Krishna will recognize you. And he would give the example, just like you have some farm boy who's enlisted in the enlisted in the military during war, and then he goes to the front lines. So he's glorified because of being on the front lines. So Prabhupada said a preacher is like the soldier on the front lines. And he's recognized by Krishna. So he always encouraged us that if you really want to be pleasing, if you really want to please Krishna, then preach, spread this movement. Krishna will recognize you. So this gives you some idea of the atmosphere that was churning in Srila Prabhupada's presence. Now, I think another significant point when we talk about associating with Srila Prabhupada is that many of his disciples did not have a lot of his association. And the way they associated with Srila Prabhupada, or the way they got to experience Srila Prabhupada, was through the disciples that had the association. For example, when I first joined Krishna consciousness, I didn't get to see Srila Prabhupada. Well, actually, I met, you'll find out, I'll tell you the story. I met Srila Prabhupada before I joined, officially moved in the temple. But for many devotees, they didn't get to meet Srila Prabhupada for months and months and months, and they didn't see him that much. So one of the ways that we associated with Srila Prabhupada, at least I experienced this, is associating with other disciples of Srila Prabhupada, especially those who had Prabhupada's association. From them you would hear different pastimes of Srila Prabhupada, what he was doing. You would hear his instructions. Prabhupada told me this, I was in his room, I did this, he told me this. He corrected me in this way, and so forth. So a lot of the association was coming through the disciples who were being changed, whose hearts were being changed, who were being motivated by Prabhupada, and who were being enthused by Prabhupada. So if you came into a temple, you would become inspired by the devotees who were inspired by Prabhupada, and those devotees were inspiring the other devotees who had little or no association. So coming into that inspiring atmosphere, in a sense, you were getting Prabhupada's association through those devotees, through the atmosphere they created, through their enthusiasm, and through their dedication. So that was a very, I think, powerful way in which we felt Prabhupada's association. It was through his movement. Just by being part of that movement. It was a movement that he created. So he created an ethos, he created a culture, he created an atmosphere. And that atmosphere, in a sense, was non-different from him. As Prabhupada said, I am non-different from ISKCON. So by being in ISKCON, we felt just by engaging in service in the association of devotees, we were getting Srila Prabhupada's association. Another way that many devotees felt Prabhupada's association was through distributing his books or doing the various services that were very dear to him. Because he wanted these services, the devotees felt connected. As Prabhupada said, I am always with my spiritual master. So the devotees felt very connected. Many devotees would remark they felt more connected with Prabhupada doing their service than they did when they were personally with him. So it's a very important point. So, we think, oh, I wish I could have seen Prabhupada. But many of us felt a much deeper connection through service, and that service is available to you today, to all of us. So, should I tell my association, my stories? You want to hear that? Or should I wait? Yes, everyone's jumping up and down in the studio. They're waiting. I can't remember anything. I forgot it all. So, around 1995 or 1996, I was interviewed by Illumination Television. And the interesting thing that happened recently is that I was watching that video. And there were many, many of those pastimes that I told that I thought, oh my God, I forgot that one. It was 15 years ago. And so we're talking about pastimes that happened 35, 40 years ago. And some of them I forgot, which is kind of scary. It was kind of a scary experience. But in any case, there are many pastimes which I described that were not put on the video because they limited each speaker. Perhaps the interview was 2 hours and what was put on was maybe 45 minutes. So hopefully I can remember some of the pastimes with Srila Prabhupada that were not on that video and relate them to you. So we should start in the beginning in how I first met Srila Prabhupada and what my experience was in meeting him. Well, you could say really I first met Srila Prabhupada in his books. I read Bhagavad Gita twice before becoming a devotee. I was coming to the temple for about 8 weeks before I decided to become a devotee. I was coming 3 times a week at least to the temple, studying Bhagavad Gita. And I had decided I would become a devotee, but I still was not that knowledgeable in Krishna consciousness because at that time the movement was very new and the devotees were not that knowledgeable. And so my understanding of who Srila Prabhupada was, what the position of the spiritual master was, or should I say is, was not clear. I would say it's not unclear, but it was not entirely clear. It was a little ambiguous to me. What role Prabhupada would play in my life, because I was not thinking of initiation at that time. I was just thinking, I'll become a devotee, I'll move in the temple. The idea of initiation was never really presented to me, so I wasn't thinking of Prabhupada in that way, and I had never seen Prabhupada. And I'd only seen devotees, and they'd talked about Prabhupada, I'd heard some tapes, and I read his books. But I really, I don't know how to explain this, this sounds dumb, but I really didn't understand what his position was within the Hare Krishna movement. You might say, well, that's really dumb, how could you not understand? The only way I could explain that is that there were only like 8 or 10 devotees in the temple that I was in. There were probably only 7 or 10 temples in the movement. There were probably only a few, 300 or 400 devotees, maybe not even that many in the movement when I joined. So we didn't really know what it was all about. So, and as I was saying, even the devotees in the temple, they didn't know that much. So not a lot was explained to us. So a lot we had to figure out ourselves. So trying to put Prabhupada in perspective, and I didn't even know, the whole history of how he came and who he was and what is initiation, what is guru. So I just wanted to give you that information because that leads up to my first meeting with Prabhupada. So you understand that I really didn't completely understand who he was. So what happened was I was going to school in Berkeley, California. I was raised in Los Angeles. My parents were living in Los Angeles, and as is normally done, students go home for Christmas, which I did. I drove back to Los Angeles, and I had decided to become a devotee. I decided to drop out of college, and at that time I was going to tell my parents what I was going to do. Fortunately, the house that I lived in, this is the house that I grew up in, the house my parents were staying in, the house that I was visiting now, was about a mile or a mile and a half from the temple in Los Angeles. And so it was very, very convenient for me to visit the temple. So I remember the first day I came back, I went to the temple in the evening and I brought some of my friends, and there was an ecstatic kirtan there and an ecstatic lecture. And my friend said, "Don't ever bring me back to the temple." I said, "Why?" They said, "Because if you bring me back, I'll become a devotee." It was so wonderful. It was so ecstatic that they were afraid to come back. So, and one of my friends, and all my friends, we all lived near the temple. So my friends would always see the devotees, who kind of come across them. So they were a figure in our lives. And I used to see devotees when I was growing up chanting their japa walking through my neighborhood, because it wasn't that far away. So anyway, what happened was that the next morning I went to the temple. Probably it was like 9 or 10 after breakfast. And as soon as I got in, walked in the door, Vishnu John was the temple commander, and I had come with a friend, I think, and he said, "Engage these boys." Everyone was engaged in cleaning the temple, so he engaged us immediately. This was the mood. Could you imagine just some new person off the street, and they just walk into Hare Krishna temple, and then they get engaged in service right away? So that was the mood. So we did a little service, and then we were informed that Srila Prabhupada is coming to the airport. And we were asked, or at least I was asked, "Would you like to come?" And I said, what do you think I said? I mean, I was like knocked off my feet. I said, "Amazing. Srila Prabhupada's coming to the airport. Would you like to come? We're leaving now." I said, "Of course." I had no idea. No one had told me the night before that Prabhupada was coming. I had no idea. Nobody in Berkeley, when I was leaving the Berkeley temple, told me that Prabhupada was coming. I had no idea. So here I am, as someone who's been going to the Hare Krishna temple for 10 weeks, has decided to become a devotee, has read Bhagavad Gita twice, and not read any other books, is chanting 1 or 2 rounds a day, is not following strictly every day all the regulative principles, but has made the decision to become a devotee, to move in the temple, and now I get to meet Srila Prabhupada. So we drive to the airport, and obviously all the devotees are very excited that Prabhupada's coming. And as I said, I didn't really understand Prabhupada's position. Then I saw Prabhupada coming through the airport, and I started crying. And you might say, well, maybe you were caught up in the atmosphere and the enthusiasm of all the devotees. That's not why I was crying. If you ask me why I was crying, what caused it, all I can say is Srila Prabhupada's presence. Perhaps, maybe, there was some connection, and I realized this is my spiritual master, some connection from another life. I don't know. Those thoughts were not going through my mind. But there was Srila Prabhupada, and I was just struck by his presence. And I just began to cry. So his presence is really overwhelming. Srila Prabhupada's presence is overwhelming. And there is so much Krishna consciousness coming from him that it could even pierce the heart of someone who is still not yet a devotee, who still doesn't understand who Prabhupada is, but still that has such a powerful effect. So I began crying. It was just amazing how overtaken I was and how overwhelmed. And I think it also, what happened is solidified my desire to become a devotee and move in the temple, because if someone makes that intention to move in the temple, there's so many things that can get in the way from the point of making that intention and actually doing it. So I think it really solidified that. Then, this was in December of 1969. That is when I met Srila Prabhupada. And right after that, several weeks after that, I drove back to Berkeley with the intention of collecting all my things, selling what I could, and then moving into the temple. Of course, my parents were very upset about that. I was dropping out of college. They were not happy about that, but I had made this decision. And so several weeks later, I had left Los Angeles, and in January, after I settled things up in Berkeley, I had moved into the temple. I think it was about January 20th, 1970, around then, sometime, or maybe January 10th or 15th, sometime around then, I moved in the temple. And I engaged in service. Everyone went out on Harinam Sankirtan every day. We all basically had the same service, cleaning the temple in the morning after the morning program and going out on Sankirtan. And 3 nights a week we would go again out on Sankirtan after. We would have some prasadam in the evening. So one day in March, they called me and they said, you're going to get initiated. So in those days, the interesting thing was, instead of asking to take initiation, they told you, we like you, you're ready, you're sincere, or at least you seem sincere, you're dedicated, you're following the program, you're going to get initiated. So there's really no explanation of what that initiation meant. For us at that time, we just thought, well, it's just another part of the program. You know, you move in the temple, you get up for Mangal Arti, then you chant your rounds, and you have class, then you have breakfast, then you do service, and then occasionally we would go to San Francisco to take part in festivals, Rath Yatra, other festivals, and sometimes we would do this and that. And so initiation at that point to me just seemed like, well, just part of the program. You know, we had a festival last week and now this week we get initiated. I really didn't understand much more of it than that. So I didn't even ask. And I don't even think I even gave Prabhupada Dakshina. Maybe the temple gave some Dakshina. Dakshina is a gift you give to the Guru. And Prabhupada said your initiation isn't bona fide unless you give Dakshina. So anyway, that was in March of 1970. So in March of 1970, many of us drove down to to Los Angeles to take initiation from Srila Prabhupada. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4. But 4 devotees were getting first initiation and 2 or 3 were getting second initiation. 5 devotees getting first initiation. So one Mataji, another Mataji, then 2 devotees from Berkeley who were sitting on my right, then myself, and then to the left of me, I believe 3 devotees who were already initiated were taking Brahman initiation. So the women, they were given their names. The way this worked in those days is Prabhupada would have your beads, and then he would chant on your beads one round, and or you would give, no, he wouldn't have your beads. You would give him your beads. I believe that's how it worked. And he would chant on them, then give them back to you. Something like that. So the initiation, as many devotees as there were getting first initiation, that's how many rounds Prabhupada would chant in real time right there in front of us. So anyway, he gave the initiation he gave the name to the ladies. And then he came to the first man. And the first man, he joined when he was very young. I think it was maybe like 16 or 17 or something. He left home and he was just living on the streets in Berkeley. And he was very absorbed in taking drugs, which is what most of the young people would do, especially the ones who were just living on the street, who weren't going to school. They spent a lot of their time smoking pot and taking LSD. So he was one of them. So that's what he was doing before he was a devotee, living on the streets in Berkeley. Or maybe living in someone else's home. So anyway, when you take initiation, Srila Prabhupada asks you the 4 regulative principles, and then you tell him, I promise to follow these principles: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, and to chant at least 16 rounds. So when this devotee recited those 4 regulative principles, Prabhupada said, what about LSD? Everybody was shocked, because we all knew that this devotee used to take a lot of LSD, and we had no idea how Prabhupada would have known that. So he said, what about LSD? Oh no, Prabhupada, no more LSD. I finished with that. Okay. So then we go to the next devotee. Prabhupada chants on the beads, gives them, what are the 4 principles? The devotee recites the 4 principles. This devotee on my right, he used to smoke a lot, cigarettes. Smoked a lot, a few packs a day. So he recites the 4 regulative principles, and then Prabhupada says, and then Prabhupada goes like this, what about cigarettes? And he goes like this, like he's smoking a cigarette. What about cigarettes? Where did that come from? Oh no, Prabhupada, no more cigarettes. Like I'm looking at this going, what is what's happening here? How does Prabhupada know this? So then Prabhupada came to me, and at that time I wasn't thinking, I don't remember thinking, what's he going to say about me? Maybe he's going to say to you, what about sex? That would be pretty embarrassing. So, but he didn't say anything. And one of the things that I liked to do when I was a young devotee, I liked to chant in kirtan, but I also liked to chant verses. So I was learning verses. So I like to do kirtan, I like to chant. And people knew that I like to chant. I mean, I was a musician, so that was kind of natural that I would like to do kirtan. And so then when Prabhupada came to me and he gave me my name, he said, your name is Mahatma Das, and Mahatma is one who's always glorifying the Lord. So it kind of indicated my mood in the early days as a young devotee that I really like to study Prabhupada's books and learn verses and talk about Krishna and chant. So that was nice. So it was nice being there with Srila Prabhupada when he's sitting in front of us and he was chanting on the beads. And the thing about those days of the Krishna consciousness movement is that nobody was even considering or conceiving that Prabhupada wasn't going to be here. It was kind of like that part of the equation couldn't function in our brain. It was just that he is the Krishna consciousness movement. He is the guru. He is the guide. We are nothing without him. And so we felt totally dependent on his guidance at all times. And so just being with him, the feeling was that everything is perfect, everything is right. Here is Krishna's pure devotee, and whatever we're doing, it's the perfect thing, and we don't have to think about anything else. So that was kind of the experience of being initiated by Prabhupada. It's just, this is the right thing, this is Krishna's devotee, we're doing the right thing, he's telling us what to do, we just have to do that. It's perfect. It's a perfect movement, it's a perfect system, and he'll always guide it, he'll tweak it as we need, he'll guide us when we're off. And we are new devotees, we don't know anything. He's the senior Vaishnava, elevated pure devotee, he knows everything, so we are totally dependent on his guidance. And so that was, if you want to go back to those days, the mood was, I mean, you could imagine, I'm a devotee 2 months. How much did I know about Krishna consciousness? How much could I know? So, just total dependence on Prabhupada's guidance, and this security in knowing that he's guiding us and that his instructions are perfect. So that was the mood. So it was so nice just to be there with Prabhupada and to watch him chant on the beads, and we kind of would take that for granted because that's what the movement was. And at that time, that year, 1970, Srila Prabhupada spent 7 months in Los Angeles, so we could go see him. And so, you take these things for granted. Like now, so many years after Prabhupada is gone, then think, oh, you're so fortunate. But in those days, it was just kind of like, that's just what Krishna consciousness is. That Prabhupada's there, he's guiding us. It can't be any other way. Not that we took it for granted in that sense, or we didn't appreciate it, but just kind of took it for granted in the sense that that's how it is. It's just what the Krishna consciousness movement is. So, my next association with Srila Prabhupada, as far as I can remember, took place in August at the Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco. At that time, I had moved from Berkeley to San Jose, which was 40 or so miles south, 40 or 50 miles south of Berkeley, to help another devotee, Chitsukananda, open a temple in the city of San Jose. And all the temples in the Bay Area would participate in helping organize the San Francisco Rath Yatra. And what happened was that Chitsukananda, just before the Rath Yatra, was transferred up to San Francisco to be the temple president, and later he asked me to come. So I had been living then for a month or so in the San Francisco temple, helping with the organization of Rath Yatra. Everyone helped with the organization of Rath Yatra. Srila Prabhupada came to the San Francisco temple for this Rath Yatra, and now that was the only Rath. Now we have so many Rath Yatras, but in 1970, that was the only Rath Yatra in ISKCON that I am aware of. And it was such a big thing, not only because it was the only Rath Yatra, but it was such a big thing because Prabhupada would come there. So, as far north as Vancouver, as far south as San Diego, as far east as anywhere, but in General City we had temples in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We had temples in Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson, like that. Seattle, of course, Portland. Everybody would come. So many, many devotees would come there. As I was saying, still the movement was young, so perhaps there were 300, 400, 500 devotees in the entire movement at that time. Anyway, the temple room in San Francisco was packed wall to wall with shaven-headed, saffron-wearing brahmacharis. In those days of the movement, there were very, 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 very few grihastas. Grihastas were the exception. Why? Because at that point of the movement was a point when many, many people were joining, and they were joining 19, 20, 21, 22. So most people were not married. Most of the married couples in ISKCON got married after they joined. They joined single. Couples joining married was the exception. And very few couples by that time had even gotten married. So it was mostly brahmacharis. The temple, just imagine a temple room, standing room only, nowhere to go, wall to wall, shaven-headed brahmacharis. I mean, nowadays in ISKCON you don't see that many devotees who are shaven-headed, just the ones who can't grow hair on their head, right? They shave their heads. But in those days, every 2 weeks we would shave our heads. That was what Prabhupada suggested, at least for the brahmacharis and the grihastas living in the temple. We'd all shave our head. And so naturally, when there was a festival and Prabhupada was coming, you'd want to shave your head, just because that's what Prabhupada liked. So whenever there was a festival or something important, everybody would shave their head, look their best, iron their dhoti, wear their best kurta and dhoti. So Prabhupada came in, and he stopped at the door, and he just was gazing around the room, looking at this ocean. It was just an ocean of saffron, shaved head. Now you imagine, Srila Prabhupada had come to America in 1965, and Srila Prabhupada had no idea what was going to happen, but his intuition was he's going to tell us what are the regulative principles, and we're going to say we're not interested. Why don't you go back to India? He really, one time Prabhupada jokingly said, he said, why did you go to New York? He said, well, my godbrothers went to Germany and failed. Then they went to England and failed. So I figured, well, let me go somewhere new, somewhere different to fail. So, this idea that Westerners could adopt Krishna consciousness was, it was questionable. And so now the movement is just beginning to grow. There's a few hundred, 400 or 500 devotees. And here in this temple room, there's 100-odd devotees, all brahmacharis shaved up. And Prabhupada's just looking at it, and he's beaming. And he's looking around the room. And we got the sense that what he saw there was that the Krishna consciousness movement was actually expanding, was actually working. Lord Chaitanya's prediction was coming true. And the grace of his spiritual master was enabling him to be successful, and proof of that success is all these brahmacharis, shaved up, surrendered souls. And he's just looking at it and beaming and just relishing and taking it in and observing it. He didn't just walk in. He stopped at the door. He was like outside the temple at the doorway, just looking at it and just beaming, and stopped. And then he came in and sat on the Vyasasana, and he was thinking of his spiritual master when he saw us. He came in, it was around noon, he sat on the Vyasasana, and he chanted the Guru Vashtaka prayers. I've never seen Prabhupada do that at any greeting, chant the Guru Vashtaka prayers. So why was he chanting them? Later we found out that Srila Prabhupada had said when he had come in and see all those brahmacharis, and he was stopped at the doorway. Later, we heard that Srila Prabhupada said, I called for my spiritual master to come and see. He was so pleased and so transcendently proud that here my mission is successful, that he said he had called for his spiritual master to come see. So when he was standing, he had called Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to come see. What an amazing thing to meditate on, that Srila Prabhupada could call his spiritual master. And then he sits on the Vyasasana and he sings the Guru Avastaka prayers, which demonstrates that he had called his spiritual master. Now he's meditating deeply on the mercy of his spiritual master, because Prabhupada always said that whatever success I have, it's all the grace of my Guru. It's not my power, not my ability. It's his grace. He's doing everything and I'm just following. And he's doing everything because I'm following. So that was a very, very powerful experience. Now, another interesting thing happened at that Rath Yatra. Prabhupada did not go on the parade because there were rumors of a group called the Black Panthers that they were going to disrupt the parade, and the devotees were afraid that Prabhupada's safety may be at stake. So they decided that Srila Prabhupada would be driven out to the middle of the parade, and then he would meet the devotees there, and he would see the deities. And then I don't remember what happened after that, if he stayed with the parade or he drove off. I think he drove off. Anyway, I had positioned myself in such a way so that when Srila Prabhupada got out of the car, when Lord Jagannath, when the carts had come, they'd stopped, and then Srila Prabhupada would get out of the car and pay obeisances. So I had positioned myself in such a way that when Srila Prabhupada got out of the car, I would be close to him. And so actually what happened was, when Srila Prabhupada was taking darshan of the deities, I was right behind him. So the carts were this way. Srila Prabhupada was here. You can see my hand. This was Srila Prabhupada and this was me. I was like this, right behind him. So this is Prabhupada, this is me. A little bit back. And Jagannath was there. So as Prabhupada was standing here, he was looking this way. And I wasn't looking at Lord Jagannath, I was looking at Prabhupada's face. Because I wanted to see what Prabhupada's face looked like when he was looking at Lord Jagannath. Because I knew when Prabhupada was looking at Lord Jagannath, he wasn't seeing wood, he was seeing Krishna. So I just stared at Prabhupada's face. Now, before I tell you what I saw, I want to mention something I forgot. When Prabhupada saw Lord Jagannath, he paid obeisances. And, sometimes we might think, well, don't pay obeisances in public. When Prabhupada saw Lord Jagannath, he paid obeisances. So I've always paid obeisances to Lord Jagannath in public because I saw Prabhupada do that. So in any case, I was standing behind Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was looking with so much affection and so much happiness at Lord Jagannath. And just looking at his face, I was thinking in my mind, this is what it looks like when you actually, this is the face of a person who's actually seeing God. It was just beaming, not beaming, just smiling, but you could see the affection that Prabhupada had for Krishna in his face. And you could see the pleasure. It's just like, when you're at the airport and you see your loved one coming in, how happy are you to see them? So Prabhupada was so happy to see Lord Jagannath. I mean, that's really the impression on his face. It's just, there's Lord Jagannath in this cart, in this parade. I'm so happy to see him. So happy to see him out here. And then Prabhupada, at this point, so what is it? This is 1970. So how old is Prabhupada now? He's born in 1896, so he's 74 at this time. And so Prabhupada sees Lord Jagannath and he becomes ecstatic and begins to dance in a way we've never seen him dance before. And he's dancing side to side. He's going this way and he's going that way. Dancing sideways. We've seen Prabhupada dance like this, swaying back and forth or jumping up and down. This time he's going sideways, back and forth. And we were just watching this in amazement. We couldn't believe it. We'd never seen Prabhupada dance like that. It was just, could you imagine being there, Srila Prabhupada sees Lord Jagannath, he's beaming, and then he begins to dance, and all the devotees are surrounding Prabhupada with mridangas and kartals, the kirtan's going on, and Prabhupada is in the center dancing back and forth. It was just amazing. Like I said, you can't imagine what it's like, but you can only try to imagine. This is actually on video. So if you ever see a video of Prabhupada wearing a dhoti and kurta, very pink, very shiny, it's satin, and all the way past his toes to the ground, that's this Leela. And Prabhupada just became extremely ecstatic. So the carts continued without Srila Prabhupada, and they went all the way to the beach, and at the beach there was an auditorium there, and there was a program, and they had another wonderful kirtan going on. And Prabhupada had this Shakti that during kirtan, when he would raise his hands, it was if, as his hands raised, he was lifting people off the ground. And people would just kind of just jump up. And oftentimes, during the kirtan, Prabhupada himself would become ecstatic and he would start jumping. And then when Prabhupada would start jumping, everybody would start jumping. So during this kirtan, after Rath Yatra, in this auditorium, I was in the back of the auditorium. Very, very back. And I would say probably 1,200 people in there, in the auditorium. And that may be an underestimate. Perhaps more. But from the back of the auditorium, I could see everything that was going on. So there was a kirtan going on. And in that kirtan, every single person that I saw in the auditorium had their hands up in the air and they were jumping up and down. And I had that vision from the back. There's just this auditorium full of hippies jumping up and down. So that was the power of Prabhupada's kirtan. And because Prabhupada was standing up, and he would stand up and he would lift his arms like this and he would encourage people. I'll put my arms lower like this. He would encourage people. And that encouragement seemed to lift everybody off the ground. So it's an amazing sight. And the sight, it was such an impression that today, 40 years later, I can remember that. Over 40 years, I can remember that sight of just this whole room of people jumping up and down. So that is also the power of a pure devotee. I think one of the aspects of the power of the pure devotee is his prayer, how Krishna answers his prayer. And his prayer is for the benefit of others, that he sincerely, deeply wants others to be Krishna conscious. So his desire is so intense. It is so deep that Krishna is reciprocating with this deep desire. So by his desire for people to become Krishna conscious, so many people are attracted to Krishna consciousness, and so many people can give themselves to Krishna. This is another aspect of Prabhupada I didn't describe in the beginning, of just the power that he had for people to give their hearts to him. So very, very young devotees could give their hearts to Srila Prabhupada and dedicate their lives, even though they weren't very involved in Krishna consciousness, just by his presence. So we're now in August of 1970. Shortly after this Rath Yatra festival, I was asked to go to Vancouver because there was a temple president's meeting and they needed someone for a couple weeks while the temple president of Vancouver was gone to oversee the temple. So it was my vast experience in Krishna consciousness of 8 months, and at the ripe old age of 19, I flew to Vancouver in the summer, which was quite nice. In the summer it was nice. And joined the devotees for daily Harinam and Kirtan, and I did my best to inspire them, because I came from a temple that was very inspired, the San Francisco temple. Here there were only 4 devotees in this Vancouver outpost, so it was kind of lonely for them. And they were not that inspired, just because there were just a few devotees there. So I was very inspired coming from San Francisco, so I was always very enthusiastic with them, and just always trying to encourage them, and Hari bowling and Gauranga ing, and leading Kirtan very enthusiastically, and just trying to really be a source of inspiration. It turns out that the temple president of that temple, which I'd never met because he was away when I was there, was pretty much the opposite of what I was doing. Very sedated, very slow, very kind of la-di-da. So I flew back to San Francisco, and the temple president came. What happened was that the devotees got inspired by me, by my mood, because it was so different than the temple president's mood. And when the temple president came back, when they compared the difference, it really struck them how different it was. And they called up San Francisco and said, we're not going to stay here unless Mahatma comes back to be the temple president. Now, the whole time I was in Vancouver, I was thinking, I'd never want to live here. This is like so austere. 3 devotees going out on Harinam. Didn't even have a car. Didn't have a van. Didn't have anything. So I get this message one day. Temple president calls me in and he tells me the news. It said, they're all going to leave the temple unless you come up there to be the temple president. Of course, in those days, we didn't have much, and we didn't think much. You know, our possessions were a couple dhotis, kurtas, a sweater, a pair of socks, a couple pairs of Brahmin underwear, a Bhagavad Gita, and a bead bag and some beads, and your Tulsi beads, and your toothbrush, and your toothpaste, and your shaver. That's about it. Those we didn't even have. You know, we got opulent later on. We got tape recorders. You know, we were like living it up. You know. And so, you know, we really didn't think. We just thought, oh, you want me to go there? Oh, really? Do I have to? You know, you don't even think, do I have to? It's just, oh, well, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. And it's kind of, yeah. So then I went up there, and I'll make this long story short. It was extremely difficult. We had no money. I was told we had $500 in the bank, so I could pay all the bills. There was 50. When I went to the bank, there was only $50 there. You know, we had like $300 worth of bills. It's only $50 in the bank. The devotees that were there were not easy to deal with. Not in the least. And it was also a challenge, not only dealing with them, but just a challenge taking the responsibility to run a temple in a new city, far away from home, and being raised in Southern California, not inclined to cold weather. It was the first time I'd ever seen snow. So, and our temple was not even in a home, it was in an industrial area. And it was actually an office building that had central heating. So, centrally controlled heating, not central heating, but centrally controlled because it was an office. So the heat went off at 6 o'clock every day because it was an office building. And so nobody was allowed to live there. So we're in the winter in Vancouver, which is not, you know, it's snowing, and the heat goes off at 6 o'clock and comes back on at 8 in the morning. So, you know, it was just like, oh my God, this is not easy. We didn't have any money to buy warm clothes. Devotees were really difficult to get along with, and some of them didn't like me, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, and they were envious. And so I was in total anxiety. Total. There was no room for anything other than anxiety. It was pervasive and consistent. And I didn't want to be there, and I didn't know how to handle this. It was just not pleasant. So one night, in the depths of this despair, in the depths of my anxiety and my frustration due to my inability to deal with the stress and anxiety that I was experiencing, and deep down within my heart, just strong desire to get out of there any way I could, as fast as I could. I didn't know how to get out of there because I knew I should do my duty. So in this intense anxiety, I have a dream, and Prabhupada comes to me in the dream, and in the dream he rubs my hands. It was very, very vivid of rubbing my hands. You know, like sometimes, especially if a friend of yours is sick, and you'll come to see them in the hospital. Sometimes they'll put out their hands. They just want you to touch their hands and just rub them, and you become pacified by that. Or if someone's in anxiety, you know, you want to touch them in some way. So Prabhupada came in this dream, and he's just like, touched my hands and rubbed them. And it had a big effect on me that I, at that point, understood that Prabhupada knew the anxiety I was in, and that he had the power to reach out and touch me. He actually knew what was going on in his disciples' heart, and he had the power to touch me and to say, it's okay, it's all right. And so that really, really pacified me. Then I had another very, almost a life-changing experience. So I stayed in Vancouver, although I didn't want to stay there. But I stayed there because it was duty. And, devotees were starting to join, but still, I felt out of place. I felt my real place was to be in California. So I couldn't stay there permanently without getting a green card, or whatever it was that I had to get. And during that time, it was a draft. There was a draft for the Vietnam War, and a lot of Americans were going to Canada. So it was difficult to get a green card. So I was thinking, I had talked to a lawyer about what to do, and the lawyer said, you're probably not going to get it. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, that's good. I don't want to get it, because that way I won't be able to stay in Canada, and I can go back honorably to California. And when everyone says, why did you leave Vancouver? I said, because I couldn't get a green card. So I wasn't going to have to give up my duty. And it was looking pretty bleak in terms of getting the green card. So I was very happy about that, and I was anticipating that I would be able to go back to San Francisco. Because San Francisco was a very inspiring and enlivening temple. There was a lot of preaching, a lot of brahmacharis, a lot of camaraderie, and it was just really the place to be, and I really missed it. I wanted to be there. So I did everything I had to do to get my papers. And I drove down from Vancouver to the border. The process was to drive into the United States, turn around, and come back through the border. So I did that. And then I gave them all my papers. And I was thinking in my mind, this is going to be the happiest night since I've come to Vancouver, because he's going to come back and tell me, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough credentials, you don't have enough qualifications, this, that, and the next thing. And then he'll allow me to stay for give me a week or so to sort out my details and come back, and I'll drive back and tell the devotees in news that I didn't get the green card. We're going to have to find another temple president, and I'll have to come back. And so the guy takes all my papers, and 2 minutes later he comes back and gives me my green card. And I'm like, no. And I think the guy was actually drunk. I said, this is not possible. And as I drove off, I felt as if Krishna was sitting next to me in the car and laughing at me. And say, look what I did, Mahatma. You have to stay here. And the transformation that took place at that point was that then I understood that Krishna and Prabhupada really wanted me there. Whereas before that, I didn't have that conviction, and that's why I always wanted to leave. And then at that point I had that conviction. It was obvious Krishna wants me here. And at that point my whole mentality changed. And instead of wanting to leave Vancouver, I was completely happy just to serve there. No matter how difficult it was, no matter what happened, I was just happy to be there. So we've only got up to, we're now about probably, where are we? Somewhere like around November of 1970. So I guess I'm going to have to come back next week and give you more nectar. I'm sorry if you were asking anything. I don't think you were asking. I didn't think there was. It's not the kind of discussion that you would ask. But I want to thank you for listening and join me next week. Oh yes, I have an announcement. Any of you out there, we're going to be doing a workshop on japa in Alachua, November 19th, 20th, and 21st. That's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. If you would like to participate, send me an email and I will give you the details. The cost is a $25 registration fee to cover your prasadam and your materials, and then we are requesting donations. So, if you would like to come, this is being organized by the local devotees, myself, and Bhakti Life, and Lakshmi Moni, who has an ashram here called the Bhakti Bhavan, and some of the local senior devotees are going to be facilitating. You're all welcome to come, but you have to register. If you want to fly in from Alaska, do it. It'll be worth it. So send me an email at mahat@aol.com, and I will send you all the details. It's going to be November 19th, 20th, and 21st, 2010. If you can make it, it will be a powerful and enlivening weekend. And what you can also do is stay through the week, because the following, I believe it's Friday and Saturday, there's going to be 24-hour kirtan, and 250 up to 500 devotees are going to be coming here. So Alachua is the place to be that weekend. So you can come for one weekend of a japa workshop, and then the next weekend for 24-hour kirtan. What more could you ask for? Quite a transcendental experience. So, if that sounds attractive to you, male, female, young, old, big, small, fat, thin, black, white, yellow, whatever color you are, whoever you are, if you want to absorb yourself in the holy name, note these dates on your calendar and see if you can make it here. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next Tuesday, also at 8 o'clock, and I'll continue with the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. Thank you. Hare Krishna.